You brought some information about this. Maybe you would like to start with that.
Going into how I got into this research.
Yes.
All right. I've been studying aspects of the 2008 presidential plus contextual properties of states.
This is the original one.
Thank you.
Some people might have said
I
this one.
must say, finally, some press was being published prominently. And I became interested in looking at the human development levels of the states and built this typology of states very inductively, which is based on the development of the state's higher level and income inequality of the state's higher level. And when you cross tabulate them, you get that classification of states, which predicts rather strongly the political color of the states. It's red, purple, or blue. And it predicts very strongly all kinds of social and economic problems of the states. My point in the book is that politicians don't consider these problems in the political campaigns. They focus more on moral issues like abortion and such, rather than narrowing in on the problems of the specific states. So there's a real misalignment between the issues of the political campaign and the needs of the citizens in these states. So this was just one of many tables where I link this typology with, in this case, homelessness and income insecurity. And what comes out of it is that states like Massachusetts, which have a very high-tech economy, also have people who can't get jobs in the high-tech economy. And that must create the homelessness. To some degree, that's a little bit spurious, because what's also going on here is urbanization. So if you can control for urbanization, that would affect the human development level of the states, and that would affect indirectly the homelessness. Now, aside from this quantitative stuff, I read something many years ago in one of the sociology journals, I'm a sociologist, that purported to explain homelessness as coming about because of family problems with the person who's going to become homeless, and the fact that the social network ties are very weak, and no one will take these people in, no other family members or friends. So they have no options.
That's certainly true of a lot of the homeless youth that's just now in Cambridge.
I want to point out, though, that homelessness is not exclusive to urban areas, that approximately 30% of homeless in America are in rural or small towns, and maybe less of a problem because we here in the city don't see them.
Well, take a look at the South. The South has high rates, I believe. Or if not,
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar, there's a book called Economic Apartheid in America by Collins and Yeskel, and they point out that between 1981 and 1986, 11 million factory jobs disappeared in America. That's a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
And in 1980, the gap between the highest paid and average worker was 42-1. And in 2000, it was 531-1. So that gap keeps moving. I want to throw out a few more statistics. It costs approximately $50 a night to put somebody in a shelter. It costs $400 a night to throw them in a jail cell. and approximately $3,000 a night to put them in a hospital. So a lot of money is wasted by waiting for people to be in the worst possible condition as a result of being homeless. And the homeless, life expectancy of homeless is, in the US, average life expectancy is about 78 years for a male. For a homeless person, it's anywhere from 42 to 52 years. And in Scotland, it's 39 years. There's approximately 400,000 homeless people that were born in the US that were born before 1964, and we found a wonderful way to eliminate them. They're all gonna die in the next 15 years because that's the limit of their life expectancy. And I have a friend who's a medical director at a major teaching hospital in Florida. And when we talked about the Reagan cuts to mentally ill treatment and the mentally ill people on the street, this tough guy was actually fighting back tears for the multiple illnesses, especially mentally ill people have, that because they're paranoid about dealing with authority, they're not really keen on taking their medication, and so on. But I want to turn the clock back 12,000 years, believe it or not, because
12,000.
12,000 years ago, the Ice Age was in full reversal. And suddenly a huge amount of fresh water that would have built up in much bigger than the Great Lakes rushed through the St. Lawrence Valley into the North Atlantic. That produced another 1,000 years of Ice Age. What happened is the weather in a lot of Asia and Europe got cold and dry, and these hunter-gatherers, I really call them gatherer-hunters, had nothing to eat. They had existed for many years on a diet of acorns and an occasional gazelle and other megafauna that disappeared. And a wild grass was found growing on the edge of an extinct volcano in Turkey, and we now call this wheat. This was the beginning of the agrarian age of humanity. And with that came surpluses, storage, hoarding, and housing. So really the housing problem began when there was such a thing as communities and housing. But according to E.O. Wilson, whose major thing is ants, emotionally, humans have not evolved much emotionally past the hunter-gatherer mentality, because it's actually homes and such are a very recent development in human evolution. So I look at homelessness as an ecological as well as political issue. And we can, I'll throw that out there maybe when we have a break up into smaller groups. But the idea that ending homelessness, I think, is not only is it an impossibility based on simple mathematics, that, for instance, we tried to end fire ants that got into this country by bombarding them with poison. What happened was they broke up into smaller colonies, and then the number of fire ants quadrupled.
But
That was,
this is not a, this isn't, so
the so-called hydra effect, that is when you
Right.
eliminate
So there's no
something.
mathematical correspondence between fire ants and homelessness. And since this is a scientific discussion, we should talk about the problem for itself and not by that kind of loose description.
Well,
so since you mentioned rural homelessness,
yeah,
people talk a lot about how rural communities are a good example of places where you still have a lot of wealth inequality, but there are types of communities where you don't have homelessness. And the reasons are the marginal cost of having shelter is very low, the marginal cost of space is very low.
Abandoned buildings.
Yes, you're very likely to have shelter that isn't used. And the community just doesn't accept the idea that someone who is there in the vicinity of the community isn't considered a community member. And so if there's a problem, they try to work out social problems. They still have similar problems with mental health and with people not having enough, not having their own social network, as you mentioned. But they deal with it in different ways.
Could I just follow up very briefly your point about the politics of this? When I was at Santa Barbara many years ago teaching, one of my colleagues, Tom Sheff, was among several people who argued that mental health was an illusion, mental illness was an illusion, it's just a labeling theory. And at the time in California, during Reagan and before, there was a movement to save money because movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and books like that led people to believe that there was no need for asylums or mental health facilities. So they pushed these people out onto the streets.
when Reagan was running for office, he talked about this person on welfare who's actually driving a Cadillac and receiving welfare from for 4 or 5 different identities and so on. When journalists actually tried to find this person, they couldn't because that person didn't exist.
This is a very core study. There's only one instance, right?
Yes.
Single example.
That too, a single example who no one could find.
But I don't think we've ever recovered from the Reagan cuts.
So yeah, that's a really interesting data question. Let's come back to that in breakouts, because people have made the point that there is a very localized saving of money, which has then been picked up by the prison system and homelessness and the homeless networks, and is now roughly 10 or 20 times as expensive. So, yeah.
Can we hear from some of the other people who are?
You want to say something?
I just wanted to comment briefly about Utah. Other people around here know how Utah has ended homelessness.
It's great.
You do.
Go ahead.
Why don't you explain that?
I'm sure you can explain it better than I can.
You know the group here.
No,
All right, I'll go ahead.
Yeah.
They did a careful study at the state level to find out what it was costing at the present time to support people who had found themselves homeless on a per person, per night basis. And then they looked at the cost of public housing, different types of public housing. And what they found out was that it would save the state money if they simply provided a house, a physical home for homeless. I don't think this applied to all homeless people. I work at a shelter and at a Monday lunch program in Boston. And there are lots of different people, kinds of people who are homeless. I have not read the Utah study that led to this policy change. You perhaps do have a reference to that study. I would like to read it.
Explain to me the nature of the solution, because you say they provided a house for each person, and the people occupied those houses.
Mm-hmm.
But they provided for the utilities and for what was the framework in which they did that? I'm just asking.
I'm not well enough read to give you the details. I do know that when you become homeless, if you're there long enough, there's a hopelessness that creeps in. There, if you have any type of substance abuse in your family background, it's very likely that you'll pick that up. And every time things take a nosedive, you're likely. And you'll get put into a treatment program. These programs run everywhere from just a night facility, where you get put on the street, all the way to a 6 month rehab detox. And there's
Is
a
this
lot
in
more.
Boston?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I know a man named John who has been fortunate enough to find a place in a 6 month program. He really wants to get on blues. He's been on blues since he was 16. So anyway, so there are costs associated with hospitalization. Some of the people who are homeless say, well, the reason that some governments don't want homelessness to end is the same way some welfare city states like Holyoke don't want to get people off welfare, because there's a huge cash flow that comes through the city associated with welfare. And there's a significant number of people who work taking care of homeless people. And I did see a lobby day at the State House. I think it was called Care Corps. And they were representing a group of people who work in hospitals with homeless, all kind home health care professionals. Okay, I've talked long enough. So that's an example of some of the costs and some of the politics that I've been able to find out in my communication with people that I talk with.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the issues, and it's something I'm very concerned about, is that homelessness here is just since the 70s in the Cambridge area, the number has increased dramatically. And there used to be rent control in Cambridge, which there isn't anymore. And the cost of living has gotten to be ridiculous. And I have a friend who lives in Buffalo, New York, and she sold her house there because her husband passed away, who had known for 50 years. And it was like, big house, $138,000. I said, Molly, you can't get a garage in Cambridge for that kind of price. And it's not like this is some, little out of the way city. There's universities, there's art museums, there's a big lakefront area. It's just costs less to live there. My daughter and my grandkids live in North Carolina, Nashville, same thing. The price of a big house is a fraction of what you get in Cambridge here. So I mean, part of it is simple, and it's happening in Somerville now because with the line coming. People are being priced out, even the stores are being priced out. So there's less jobs available for people. Something like Spare Change has helped a lot of people get off the ground and on their feet and given them a job, but it's basically just survival kind of job, but it's helped with the homelessness problem quite a bit. I did talk to James Shearer, one of the founding members of Spare Change. I volunteered at their gala thing at the Nerd Center. Anyway, it was a lot of these vendors didn't show up at this thing, and I think part of it is because they had a bar, and probably was a mistake, but it also loosened up people's wallets, unfortunately. So they did make some money at it. But I know one of the vendors I've talked to, just like a friend, and years ago he asked to borrow some money. And I said, well, what's it for? And he said he's straight and sober. He wanted his medicine through Mass Health. So he only needed like $10 to get his medicine. And he told me he was dealing with schizophrenia. And I know he's just getting the pills. He's not getting the help. He's not getting the counseling or whatever it is. He does live in a shelter in Boston. The fact that there's a shelter for homeless veterans in Boston is despicable, I think. And one thing that's very small, that's like a little, tooth fairy step or something compared to what is something like I don't know if people are familiar with the Panera chain, and they have the restaurant called Panera Cares. There's 5 of them in the country.
Yeah.
It's not catching on, but You can go in there and get a cup of coffee and give them $5. Someone else can have $5 and get a whole meal. There's no cash register, there's no price list. So, because the man who started this,
It's in Kimball Square, right?
no, it's in Government Center. City Plaza, it's near the shelter for all the veterans. It would be by the Government Center T stop, which is closed right now because of an elevator. But, so, you know, here's an attempt because someone is asking you for money. You don't know what it's for. Is it for food or is it for drugs? This way, you know, you're making a donation that then will go towards at least getting someone some food. It's not going to get them a job. It's not going to get them a house. But on top of being homeless, to be hungry is just, you know, even worse. I was sitting on a bench in Central Square, and there were this group of students from MIT actually handing out sandwiches. They assumed I was sitting there homeless and tried to give me a sandwich. And you know, we talked about it. I didn't feel insulted. I felt sort of a compliment by it because I've met some wonderful people who happen to be homeless. It could be just one paycheck if somebody you're away from. You know? So I don't know what the answer is. I know in this current issue of Spare Change, they have one city, and I can't remember where it was, is using old buses for shelters. One time I gave a guy some money who I know in front of an empty store, and I said, this is kind of ironic. Here's a store for rent. The city could rent that store for the night, put some beds in, get a couple of cops to just be there, and at least have a place to sleep in the middle of the winter, and then close it up during the day or something. I mean, the spaces are there, the money's there. It's just not going where it needs to go.
Yeah.
That's and it's pretty. And the fact that it's homeless youth, we're talking about that. A good number who've either been thrown out or had to leave home. It might be because of drugs. It might be because of sexual priorities and preferences. Suddenly, a kid comes out as gay, and that's it. You're out the door. And they do have what's it called? There's a program in Harvard Square. Lutheran Church. What? Lutheran Church. There's a program that some students have started, but there's also Youth on Fire, I think it's called something.
Yeah, Harvard has a Youth on Fire group.
And they at least, and now they started to provide some shelter for these kids to place to stay, as well as counseling and helping them with their
The
issues.
fastest growing segment nationally of homeless people are children. And there is a wonderful group in Massachusetts called Horizons for Homeless Children. And you can find that very easily with a search. And they are amazing.
There's a bench in Central Square called Our Place for families who children. There's volunteering there. In the morning.
That's great.
Babies, you know.
For the people who just came in, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, maybe 4. If you weren't here when we introduced ourselves,
Why don't you do that?
yeah, would you introduce yourselves?
Yeah, my name is Rosario. I come in the last Salon. So I came from Italy, and I'm working as a consultant. But I have other experience. My interests are in management and corporate responsibility. So I'm very interested about the social subject and how to find some solution. So I like to participate in this salon and try to bring and pick up some idea.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Austin. I'm here since I'm an organizer of a new meetup group called Data Science for Social Good. We've got members who are in all different areas of interest, whether it's homeless or inequality. And as part of the meetup groups, I'm not sure if people have heard meetup, but there's meetups across the US, and so we're working with meetups, data science meetups in other cities. And we're trying all to figure out how we can work with the whole community. There's open data that can be analyzed to help out or even to connect people. So that's a new group that we formed a couple months ago. We're just trying to help out where we can.
I'm David House. I'm a computer researcher formerly with MIT Center for Digital Business, and now I am independently working on my own research related to homelessness.
Can you repeat your name again?
Connected homelessness. David House, HUSC. If you Google me, you'll find me connected with WikiLeaks and the Bradley Manning push.
My name is Selma. I'm from Brazil, and I like to help people and take care of people and find good life for people. I'm social work and home health aid. I came because we want to see how things work.
Welcome.
But I'm seriously here. I've been in Boston 17 weeks.
17,
17.
seen some changes too.
Are you familiar with the homeless problem in Brazil, like in
Oh,
Rio
yes.
and so on?
Children.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, in Brazil, they live in the street because they don't have a house. They are not homeless because they feel like alone in the house, or they really need a house. They need a place to go to stay. And the kids over there, they feel like more safe in the street than in the house because they live in the project. It's a lot of drugs and a lot of violence. And so many times you can see people asking for food or blankets. They don't feel safe in the streets too. It's very hard. It's very difficult to work with them in Brazil.
I know the ones in the favela.
Favela, yeah.
Up
The
in the
project is not project like here. The project like here is a very nice house over there, but they do like with a paper or with a woods, and it's terrible. They don't have anything to like improve their life. To do it's very hard. It's hard to go to the favela to work with them too. It's very difficult. They don't like to go to the kids don't like to go to school because the school is not interesting for them because they show like fruits like things they cannot have any things like that. Like all you can see the picture of beautiful fruits, beautiful things, but you're hungry. See, they don't like it. They don't. So many kids when they school have some food for them, they go there just to eat. They don't want to learn anything. And they grow up, and after they grow up, they say they don't have any motivator, they don't have anything. They just want to kill people. That's why they don't care about anything.
The Olympics didn't help.
No.
Like, to me, that's a waste of time.
May I say something?
Sure. And then anyone else who's been working on projects in this area, it would be great to hear something from you. Maybe David, working on something specific.
Yeah, I'm very interested about the homeless concept because it's a very broad, in my opinion. I come from Italy, and I know that Brazil, the homeless, almost every country have, homeless. But the problem is that it's a very broad concept because a large concept because there are several ways to be homeless. So there is not the problem only of the house, but in English we have the difference between house and home. Probably in Italian, no, there is only one concept, is casa. So the problem is probably that people lose the concept of home. So, and concept of home is very large. Sometimes there are, problems like that they don't have money, they don't have food, so they cannot pay, for houses. Sometimes they have problems, like drug and other problems like this. But there are people that want to live in the street. So I talked with several when I used to work in another place close Boston. I used to travel, and every morning these people they get up from the tool and they took their own home or mattress that was carton mattress.
Mhm.
So, and I talked with somebody, and they told me every day is the same way. So, I mean, people sometimes after when they lose their home, the concept of family, home, they lose themselves. So you can bring them in a house because it's not the house that is gonna give them the opportunity to live again. So we talk about homeless, but the problem is very big. Is larger than we think because there are psychological aspects that are very important and that we have to consider.
Thank you.
I like that house on home. Provide and shelter, but is that home? I've heard some pretty horrible stories about guys telling you about the shelters. I mean, they're laughing and telling it as a joke, but it was pretty bad.
And when we're breaking down questions about what can be done, I assume that's why you're clearing the.
Well, I wanted to clear the board because I wanted to put something up just for thinking about things. There's we talk about homelessness, but we're already exposing that there are many different aspects of it. I think it helps to just put it down maybe a little bit, and maybe you can help me. There's issue of mental health and its connection to institutionalization that is not happening. There is
Addiction.
there is addiction.
Severe disability.
There is employment, disability, or other health issues.
And social orientation.
There is
broadly speaking.
social orientation. You mean the ability of a person to interact socially?
Well, I wasn't thinking of that so
Or
much
you're
as I
being
was thinking of that
having
the
family
the largest population of young people are LGBT because they get thrown out of their homes.
Social isolation.
Social isolation.
There's also a racial divide. And 40% of homeless people are African American versus 11% in the total population.
Okay, those are demographic issues. Those are different from this kind of factors. I mean, we can put them here, but what are the
Yanira, a question for you along that lines. Could we consider them a cohort instead of a demographic?
well, this is a different set of things. These are things that apply to the individual as opposed to things that apply to the groups that the individuals are part of. And the association of these kinds of things with different groups, then you have to figure out what is the property of the system that is causing the individuals of that group to be more likely or less likely to be associated with
Just
this.
a very quick follow-up. So somebody comes out and now they're homeless. Somebody's born black, they're more likely to be homeless. I'm just saying I don't quite understand how we're gonna parse that.
Okay,
And
but
that's
in
what-
principle, there are a bunch of things here, right? that
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And it may
I
go
would
under
add,
social isolation.
let me just add another one. I would add, I don't know, some measure of competence. And then the point is that these things are work together, right? Of course, if there is someone who is disabled, they may not be able to be employed. If they're not employed, they may look to drugs. They may have problems that are mental health. If they are socially isolated, they're likely to have problems because they don't get help if they have problems. They cannot. No one is going to take them to the hospital if they need to go to the hospital. Right? So all of these things tend to be mutually reinforcing of problems when you have this kind of context. So, fair enough so far?
You include alcoholism.
So let me just add housing over here, or lack of housing, right? lack of housing over here and make it be one of these things rather than be the only thing that we're doing. Right? One way is to treat this as this is sort of the thing that we're organizing these around, but we could just put this as one of these factors. If we put it as one of these factors, then we might ask how many people have these things that might have housing, but in fact have these problems as well, right? So the question then becomes, which issue are we dealing with? Are we singling this out, or are we? So now let's talk about what kinds of questions that we can ask.
Wouldn't sort of sociocultural context speak to this race issue as well?
Why don't we put in culture?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So there are a number of things that we can do. We can ask if this are the conditions that we're kind of looking at, and we're looking at things over time, what's changed? What is the structure of the current context that's different from previous structures? So we can talk about, increasing social isolation as the driver of these things, or we can talk. Let me give an example of something that one can talk about. It's different here than in Brazil. In Brazil, if someone doesn't have a place, they may not have a place in the city, but they can go to the favela and build themselves their own place. Here, you can't do that.
Yeah, but so many times, so many people, they cannot build anything in the favela because it's already full.
Maybe it's already full, and that creates a limitation.
To go to.
Okay, so one question is, can someone create their own space, or is the structure of the space rigid? It creates a different context.
That's
right?
correct.
Another question is, so things one might talk about relevant to housing are the rigidity of available space.
Does that mean rules, process, all that? Is that what you mean by rigid?
Rigid means, if I want to, I can go and sleep on am I considered homeless if I can take a few pieces of wood and put them together and all of a sudden I have a house?
And will they let you stay there?
Well, they tell you there.
Okay.
That's the point. Okay. But another question then becomes the cost and the competence associated with housing. Okay, there's some threshold of what you need to be able to do in order to have housing here in the city. And the question is, how is that relative to other things? For example, if it's possible for me to do other things that enable me to survive, like find food, then there's a sustainable circumstance where I find food, but I live on the street. If I cannot find food, then I cannot live on the street. Right? So there are certain domains in which it's possible that housing is the rate limiting thing, and you end up having people that have other things, including they may be employed and they don't have housing.
A quick note to that. In Los Angeles, there are people who have very expensive cars, very expensive clothes. They shower in a sports club.
But they don't have
no
housing.
house.
Right, because
And nobody
housing
knows.
became a large barrier. So this is one of the things that one might look at in terms of what's going on. The other thing, which I think your point about is more about, is what's the other side of this, right? The other side of this is having a job, having a family and social contacts, having a home, having all of the things. And the point is that if instead of this, what we're trying to do is to construct this, then it's more than just figuring out about housing, obviously.
So just to loop this into the question about Utah, that is the conversation the Utah state legislators were having. They had people coming to them from many angles saying, we'll tackle this angle, we'll tackle this angle. If you look at the money that the US spends, that $5 billion gets distributed across sort of narrow silos in many of these directions. And there was one very enthusiastic group that had some followers in Salt Lake City who said, provide housing first. And that's the first stage.
That's the thing that will help enable other things.
Correct. And so they're the first stage who said,
are part of the point of these middle things is to try to figure out what are in fact the levers for change, right? If you understand that a shift of the conditions in a particular direction drives these issues, then you can try to understand how to do that. And again, I don't have the specific information, but this is what a mapping of this would start to look like.
This actually begs a question that I think we've been talking about, the house versus a home, which is when we're sitting here, are we seeing the shelter as a place allowed? They need a certain amount of reliable shelter so that they can pull the rest of their life through that. Are we looking at it as the fundamental thing on the Maslow thing? Are we saying shelter equals the bottom of the pyramid, and without that, everything else is unstable? Is that what?
Well, but I think we recognize, for example, that food is even more basic than shelter,
Yes.
right? So it's, I don't think these things are that clear. I also think that, for example, one could argue that social isolation is the thing that is breeding all of these problems, right? So again, I'm not sure what is the drive.
Walden Pond was a good example of let's get away from it intentionally. And I think you will find if you ask around that there are people who are socially isolating themselves because, like in Brazil, their own family or their own colleagues or their own situation in life has just become a little nutty.
But the other thing is just to point out that one could create circumstances, as I said, where homelessness on the street is not viable because you don't have food, yes, you don't have homeless, but that's because they die even earlier, and therefore you don't have a homeless problem. So homelessness has to do with a particular domain.
Fortunately, at least there are some good food programs in the Cambridge and Boston area. So, you were talking about one you work at.
Well, this
Go ahead.
state is among the best, has among the best groups to deal with homelessness in the country. We're right up there in the top 1, 2, 3 states nationally. If you go to the south and southwest, where it's warmer, maybe that's easier to live on the street. I don't know, but the situation for homeless people is a lot worse.
I think he wants to speak.
Thank you. I was just going to say that I think that social intimidation can play a factor in a lot of this, especially social isolation, the culture factor, also mental health in certain contexts. If people feel socially intimidated, they may withdraw from society of their own accord and start living out.
Of course.
Okay, so I actually don't see there's a difference between the factors we write on the left and the factors we write on the right, because I think they're the same thing on the right. We said there's a more, I guess, emotional factor with family and home and job, but the reason people don't have them is because they probably have one of the things happen to them on the left, which is they may have a mental health issue, or they're isolated socially, or they have addiction problem. And then the thing is that I think people do, because we can't naively solve the problem by literally giving, by having a council house and make everyone live in it, because you're not solving homeless issue, you're solving, you're helping people to become self-sufficient, to live on their own, and obviously giving them a shelter doesn't do, and it's hard to solve all of the problems on the left at once. Like you can't just suddenly help someone or have the money to help someone get rid of the addiction and provide them food and house. So that gets complicated.
But I actually have a question. You said that to do housing first. Does it solve actually the problem, or does it make people disappear?
So the traditional approach is to figure out whether people are staying in housing, whether they've found employment, to look at it from the standpoint of individual personal development. And what I think was interesting and different about the Utah analysis was they just said, those things are obviously important, and actually at a more basic level, it's just the morally right thing to do. But people have found it hard. Let's see if we can save money. And so they just did the financial analysis, and they said whether or not you measure these other things, because when you start, people argue about the metric. They looked at what they were spending per individual, and they said, you know what, it is more cost effective ignoring all the other things. and so yeah, you will not be surprised that different groups who do case studies will use very different. Yeah.
And if there's jobs, there also has to be a decent rate of pay, depending on where you're living, to afford to buy a sandwich or rent a room.
And I think
Oh.
Rosario.
Yeah.
And I think was
Well, I was thinking that abuse needs to go over there.
okay.
Because if someone is abused and they have to get out of the situation, but they don't have the money to get out of the situation, that form of displacement, that's a major displacer. And it's one that it affects many social categories. And the means to get out of it, sometimes people just have to get out and get away, but there's nothing there for them. And that's, society's not ready to make those transitions.
Partner
To help
abuse
people.
or even child abuse. So, say abuse.
Just abuse.
Yes.
Just abuse, because there are so many spousal abuse, you name it.
Yeah.
And conceiving of getting out of it and how you're going to get out of it is a huge struggle for many, many people. So, and many people stay housed, living in intolerable life circumstances, simply because they consider that they need to remain housed.
Good point.
Because of I think the rigidity of available space is a concept that needs to be looked at again and again, because my car was the best alternative. It was better than a shelter, certainly better than a shelter, and I couldn't do it now because of the price of gas, and because people are becoming so afraid of having a car parked somewhere around us.
So I have a question about this. I don't want to, there are other people who want to talk, so I don't want to do it now. But the question that I have to think about is, why is that one thing better than others? Presumably has to do with location. Housing is available someplace. Right, so to say that the housing is the problem, somehow it's the housing in some place that needs to be available.
Yeah, I'd like just to focus the attention on different aspects, because in the concept of homeless in several countries, because we are talking about developing countries and developed countries. So this is big separation that we have to make. And also we have to consider that in the developing country, probably people are in the first level of the Maslow state. So meaning in the first level, so meaning they need food, they need everything. Instead, in the developed country like United States or other countries, the problem is why these people they are homeless when we have houses, we have probably money, we have access to the job market, but these people they don't find out the job, they have a problem, or they are lost in some way, like in the family, like divorce, like other problem, and these are sometimes consequences of the problem. So are not the causes, but at the same time are consequences and causes of the problem. And the last concept that I would like to introduce is the psychological aspect. This is why before I made the difference between house and home. When we, like individual, we lose the concept of home, we lose the concept of ourself, the perception of ourself inside a family, inside a group. So we are in the Maslow state, in another level. It's not the first level. We are in another. So the problem is also these people lose the dignity sometimes. And this is very important aspect because when you lose the dignity, you lose yourself. This is why you are in the street sometimes, because you are not yourself. So in that point, when there is this kind of problem, in my opinion, you don't need only a house. You need a home. I mean, you need a support, psychological support that give back you respect for yourself, and you bring back in the in the society. And at that time, you're gonna get home.
There's a barber in Hoboken, New Jersey, for instance, who gives out free haircuts to homeless people. You're talking about dignity. And they found that has a huge help for people just to look better. They feel better.
Yeah.
John, you wanted to say something, and then
I'm gonna ask-
and
I'm
first.
gonna ask you a question. Oh, well, should I say?
Yes, go ahead, and then John.
Do you know the name of the Obama administration's current program? Because it was just covered last night on
Opening doors.
National Public Radio, and its failures were that the goal of the program is to get people housed very quickly. Fix it. And lo and behold, people can't stay housed for a variety of reasons because they can't pay the rent. And so now what's being looked at is the number of auxiliary services that are needed in order for people to remain housed. Because that is the problem.
Sorry, whatever that is, I guess, is not opening doors. Opening doors is a specific project which, if implemented, would ensure housing for all the chronically unhoused. Everyone then their rent is capped at 30% of their income. So if you don't have income, you don't pay rent. Well, you still get some Social Security income, and so 30% of that goes.
It's sort of a Section 8.
That's right. Yeah.
And this is.
But so this must be something different.
This is an emergency kind of looking at it as a crisis management.
John was next.
Also, one thought that came along. One was the current welfare system. Like when the discussion was on food, clothing, and shelter. I was thinking about like food stamps. And wondering then, as a person, there's people who are aware of those and they tap into that, and then there might be people who aren't aware of sometimes that are out there. That was one thought. The particular one was like a network of like when there are people who are out or homeless or whatever kind of problem, and there are existing programs, but they are not aware how's their network to connect to them. And it made me think of a gentleman in a group. There's a group in town called Code for America, or it's called Code for Boston, and there's a team working on a project called Need Now. And what they're doing is compiling a list of all the homeless, all the nonprofits that help homeless. They're trying to have like a directory and then have like, what's your needs, and food, clothing, or shelter. And that they're building that kind of, it's an ongoing project, so it's not there yet. But the gentleman's name is Ken Johnson, and he has a website already built, like a prototype, that they're trying to do that, like connecting. So just a couple of streams of thoughts about just like, if there are resources out there and there are people who need them, the question is why do some people find those resources and take advantage of it and other people don't?
Sam,
I think an answer to that. So this really refers to the dignity thing that you're mentioning. So it seems to me that there's at least two camps of homeless people, my personal experience, those who have some motivation to move forward in society and those who do not. And are still out there looking for their dignity, as you said. Maybe, in fact, they don't even know what to call it. They don't even know the word dignity, what it means in the top definition. So determining those two camps, I think, is important, and finding the people that don't have that part and making sure that they're continuing their search, which is a very personal experience. They're getting through stuff is important. And I think that may explain something about what John said about why certain people don't seek out services. If you're not fully mobile, then why seek anything out except what you're looking for?
Some access to services and jobs really requires a phone and or an email address at this point. Because so many jobs now, the first thing they want to know is your phone number. And there is a group, I think, in LA that has been distributing cell phones to homeless people. And they have found that there's a lot more people getting jobs because they can actually connect and communicate with the people who have jobs to offer. But you must have a phone number to be able to be contacted.
Some of this may go back to even basic schooling and education. Because it's paid through real estate taxes. I mean, I've talked to another vendor and found a violin in the street. He was very excited he could get some money for it, maybe missing a string. And I said, maybe you know someone who could play it. And he said, maybe my daughter. I said, do they have music in her school? He said, no. So in Cambridge, they do have it. In Brookline, you were talking, they have the music. But why don't they have it in Roxbury? Because that's where the cuts are. So you start all to begin with. If each kid, each child is getting an equal education, there is a little more potential for them as adults. I think I'm starting with strikes against you.
The Horizon project I mentioned is very keen on getting education for homeless or about to be homeless or partially homeless kids, and they have a very, very good website that is worth checking out. Another group I want to mention is called Conrad Hilton Foundation. And what they have found is there are many people who say that it's scary to go from the street to housing. It's a transition. And what they do is they have a one-year program to train caseworkers to meet with people who were formerly homeless and now have homes, to talk to them about what they went, what emotional and physical things they went through. Because it's easy for us living relatively high off the hog to theorize about what it's like to live on the street. It's different once you've been there for a long time.
That's a great example of a distributable problem, right? The network of people who had been through this process at some point.
It's a film based on a true story. It's called The Soloist, about this musician who eventually becomes homeless, and this reporter in LA finds him. And the reporter keeps trying to get this guy into a home and shelter. He just can't live that way. He's just more comfortable outside. And finally, I think it's his wife or someone says, why don't you just try to be his friend and not his savior? And they become friends, and I guess in the movie credits, the reporter and this person are still friends. There's an interview with them.
That's often brought up at we have a coffee clutch on Sunday, which is attended by some of the people. The lunch program is 30 to 100 people, and there's a core group, some of whom are volunteers, some homeless. And so there's opportunities to talk. I do a welcome thing. Somebody stands outside, outdoors, and when people arrive, and it's just a matter of saying hello. And in the time that they're smoking a cigarette or thinking about going in or doing the other things that being a homeless person they do that I don't understand. I understand more than I did a year and a half ago when I started with this. But simply occupying the same space and time for a day of work with 100 people, it turns the way you look at the world. It changes the way I look at the world. And so what you said about walking in like a savior, one of the things that people tell me some of the people that I've come to meet is that there's a society, a social structure that exists among homeless people. Now, some people are real communicators and spend a lot of time moving around the city. And after being on the street for 15 or 25 years, you get to know a lot of people that you've seen before. And if you don't spend most of your time substance addicted, or if you don't spend most of your time fighting the meds or some other demon, you get to know all these people. And for a few, 2 or 3 people to say, well, I'm not the one who's confined, condemned to the streets. You're inside, and you don't understand. You don't understand the freedom. Of course, when it's 5 above or 10 below, I don't hear that when it's 5 above, 10 below. But that's a really important thing, is simply spend, it's like racism. You know, you spend enough time with African American people, eventually you say, oh, there's huge diversity among this population, just like ours. Well, there's a huge diversity among the homeless population, just like there's a huge population. And when I go to my I'm in a 12-step program, and when you go to a 12-step program, most of the people in the 12-step programs they have homes. So anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I think some of that freedom you're talking about, that feeling of being free and not hemmed in, may go back to that hunter-gatherer instinct that we still have from a million years of evolution as hunter-gatherers, and a couple thousand years as actually living in discrete communities.
One of the strongest, soberest members of that part of the lunch program, he carries 3 packs. When he carries all 3 of his packs, he's 35 to 45 pounds. And one of them is his office, one of them is his house, and the last one, I've forgotten what the 3rd one is. But he doesn't carry them all. Having a safe place to lock up your goods is incredibly, if you want to know what's going on in homelessness, talk to Kate Laser at the First Church Congregational in Cambridge, who ran Boston Warm, which was set up by an interreligious task force after the bridge to Long Island was closed. And most of the substance abuse programs were over there on Long Island, and they still haven't been replaced. After, that was October. That was like almost a year ago. So Kate Laser was the staff person who was there every day at Project Warm. It was an open door day place. If you wanted to crash, there was a place in back where you could just lie down and rest. It opened a month after the bridge closed, and it's on the end of its last month.
Could you spell her name?
Lazer.
Kate Laser.
Kate Laser. She's ordained in the congregation.
Bring the food in. Let's announce.
And she has a Friday cafe for homeless and non-homeless people on Fridays from 2 to 4. And that would be a good way to meet her. She's very personable, and the interreligious task force chose her because she was the most skilled person that they could find who had been in training with Tina Rathbone, who's the other guru of this faith-based initiative.
What did you say on Fridays, 2 to 4?
Yeah.
Where?
It's at the First Church Congregational. It's on the Common, that big stone concrete.
Got it.
There's a Saturday program.
11 Garden Street.
I think so.
Let me ask you, since you're more on the front lines than most of us, Are shelters safe place, do people feel safe in shelters?
Once they get into the shelter, but they're not safe waiting in line. They get beat up.
Some are not safe.
Some are
in
safer
shelters
than
either.
others.
Ask women, just ask women.
And theft is a huge problem in shelter.
So it's not a safe place to lock up your stuff.
Oh, absolutely not.
Well, it was on Long Island. They could have used the ferry to go back and forth. And they didn't. Even the man who ran the camp offered to fix the dock for them, so they turned it down.
You know, I think the city had somebody wants to develop that.
So I know you've only got a few minutes. I mean, you've got the insight. I just wanted to suggest a couple things that keep coming back. One is really good fact finding around this. I think you're going to find very different, very deeply held beliefs about everything we've talked about, and that in order to be fair at the root level of this effort, that you need to talk to people who have very deeply held beliefs that totally contradict each other, because that's part of what we're dealing with in this, is that people do see very different things. People have very strong beliefs. The second thing is there are some wonderful people in the community, and I hope we start making a short list of people who have been doing it for years, seeing conditions change as the economy changes, because once people started going for money, once Section 8 started being hotels and people were flipping their houses into Section 8 because it was a reliable check. Yeah. It's like one domino effect after another. If we're gonna rewind that tape and go back early, we also need to find the places of hope. And El Sistema, which for kids in music in Latin America, the liberation theology, which seems to be pulling together a lot of this. I'm not an expert, but I keep hearing these things of look to the Pope's encyclical. There are people at a very big level saying we've got to take a massive look at this, because this is about dignity. It is about hugely intelligent people, and it's about a world that's kind of coming across as mad or maddening. The system itself looks mad to a lot of people. And so I love the fact, I hope you will be the Switzerland.
That seems very absolutist.
I'm not trying to be absolutist. I'm saying the full inquiry of this, one that's full of heart and listens to all the voices, I think is an essential first step. And there are other people like Rob Moyer at Ocean River Institute who've done that around other issues. So I hope you'll reach out to some of those people who are already connected in Greater Boston and beyond.
Perhaps you would like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Eager to, but my name's James Williamson. I've lived in Cambridge for 45 years, and I've seen this evolve. Now in Central Square, every single bench is occupied at night. The Samusa, so-called bus shelters, which I call illuminated billboard advertising opportunities disguised as bus shelters, are now homes, sleeping quarters for people. The one right in front of City Hall, where we have a city manager who gets paid $315,000 a year, who doesn't even live in Cambridge. I got a problem with what's happening in Cambridge. I'm glad to hear there's some talk about Cambridge. When I looked at the text description, I thought this was, the global homeless problem. And I was going like, yeah, well, we got a big one right here in Cambridge. I'm glad to hear that that's some of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I would just say, given I call Cambridge now Antibiotechia, and I kind of feel like there ought to be a tax on commercial real estate, not just the incentive bonus that's being discussed now, and that the city council will probably adopt a slight bump up in that incentive bonus payment, but I'd like to see something tied to homelessness. It's just an idea that occurred to me as I kind of came here. On major commercial real estate development. And there's a NECSI study that's just been completed that is tied to lawfully being able to increase the incentive bonus payments. That was done by a guy named Carl Seidman at MIT, who's done a lot of work in New Orleans, in the Broadmoor neighborhood there. He did this study commissioned by the city administration. And the whole idea of the NECSI study is linking displacement, higher rents to increase in commercial real estate development. So there's a real linkage between more and more it could be other kinds of commercial real estate development as well, as long as it's not out, even if it's housing. So that's my spiel.
Thank you
Yeah,
for
let me
catching us
ask
up.
you something.
Hold on one sec.
Yeah.
We're kind of running a little bit, go ahead, yeah.
So I pulled out 4 of the topics that people have mentioned a lot. One is general fact-finding and data, and different views on where we should be looking and what we should take seriously. Some people have their preferred source or their preferred area of focus. But I think there's a real question about where we find the data, where we find independent people to analyze it, and how we work with it, where that makes a difference. One is connecting different existing community groups. I think that's something we can actually make progress on in the next half hour. A small group, especially if we have a couple people from local groups and online groups who know folks who are working in this space. And then 2 specific examples. One is working with cases of abuse and youth who have just lost their houses. That's a nice and specific case, I think, and it's very well tracked, separate from the rest of them. At least single mothers with children who are usually, a large number of those cases become homeless as a result of abuse or families breaking apart. They're tracked separately, but they're not normally handled separately. And then there's a whole network of church groups that deal with it in a different way. I think that might make an interesting practical breakout. And then there were a couple talks about a city approach. Are there obvious things that we should think about that could make a difference in our city? And are there things that we could start a conversation with our local representatives and legislators? That also feels like an area where we could get feedback in the next month by the time we meet again to talk about this. Could we have a quick show of hands indicating?
Can I just add one? Did anyone mention Youth on Fire?
Yeah.
Okay. And also, did anyone mention the new City of Cambridge initiative that began, I think, last week or the week before, with 2 sessions with homeless people who are homeless, but others were invited. That is in the fall going to sort of morph into some larger city-wide city administration initiative. Did anyone mention that?
Does it have a name?
Yeah, it does. I'll think of it in a minute. But apparently there's this push to have a citywide initiative around homelessness that has been launched in a preliminary way with these 2 sort of 2-hour-long workshops.
The city of Boston?
No, Cambridge.
So these are workshops?
Sorry?
Can
People were invited to come to a session at the Central Square Library from 11:30 to 2 one afternoon, a week or 2 weeks ago now, I think. And then there was another session scheduled in the evening. And there was supposedly a lot of outreach to people who are homeless. And people were brought together to begin discussing sort of, among other things, sort of the nature of the scope of the problem, the needs, and stitching together all these different entities in the city of Cambridge, the police, Department of Human Services, all these different people. And the woman who's coordinating it works for the Cambridge Department of Human Services.
Great.
And I could get that information to whoever's interested.
This is democracy at its best, when everyone can come to the table and say what is on their mind. But I have one question for you, since you've got Cambridge written all over you.
Really?
Yeah.
Which is, what about the issue of bathrooms and this whole issue that it seems like this whole city.
I like that question. But hold that thought.
Yeah.
We're gonna do 20-minute breakouts, and hopefully the people who are interested in figuring out what we can do in the city, especially anything in Cambridge and Boston, will be in that group. I don't know if we're gonna have people interested in all of these. Can we just do a quick show of hands? People who'd be interested in talking about data sources, fact finding, data networks. Great. 1, 2, 3.
Well, I want to hear what you're doing. Are you going to be in the data group? Is that the way to find out? You who have started, I don't remember your name, I apologize.
You mean John?
She's like,
She's like, yeah.
I don't know. No, I think she's like,
And what are you talking about?
I can share more
I
what the
don't-
group is, yeah. What we're doing.
I want to find out about your meetups. I really, but I think I would rather find out about his meetups than go to a fact-finding data session. I'm thinking out loud.
Yes, but I had you in mind. You're the person who talked about it. Would you be happy to participate in that?
Spur.
Community groups.
Who wants to participate in the community groups right now?
We can combine those two if it ends up being the same people.
There's a lot of overlap between the people who do it well and the people who have the information, so yeah. There's a good fit there. Community groups and fact finding.
Abuse in youth and individual case studies. Yeah, so again, just bear in mind that these groups are most effective if it's 4 or 5 people, so you can actually get things done. You're going to see the notes from all the groups. So is there anyone who wants to lead this discussion?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm capable.
I can do it.
Great, David, thank you. And a city approach, things that city could do. Great, it sounds like you know a lot more than us. Excellent, okay. So if these two groups can just gather in the same place, and if there are more than 7 or 8 of you, maybe just break into 2 talking about the same things.
And the other 2, so why don't we have these 2 groups meet in here?
And these
These 2 groups, you can meet down there in the conference room or out in the hallway.
Yeah, so if you walk down this way towards the entrance, there's a nice conference room on the right.
And is there a chance I can attach this to there to get a little charge? You need, can that run without being plugged in? I thought I had it charged, but it's takes a while.
There's a little bit of food that has arrived for people who are hungry. So
I'll just park it. Then I can find this information.
we may lay out some food and you can grab some.
There's food comes before shelter. There's pizza out here. You can grab a piece of pizza on your way into it right now.
they have a speaker's bureau, spare change. They have to have food money. I don't know how much they pay part of it, we'll pay whatever they go. Again, a sentence person.
And why the
Oh,
results were not.
I don't know.
It's a very good question.
Funding project, we're trying to get money for it.
And
Fund me or something like that.
there's a paper
He's just trying to get people
that
to
I'd
tell their stories.
like you to know about,
So,
yeah, well,
he's a good writer.
Chapin Hill at the University of Chicago.
That would be really nice. It would be wonderful to get people from a full spectrum of currently homeless and working on
You can
the
find
problem
this
space, people
online.
who were homeless
Susan
within the last
Brown.
10 or 15 years, and people who have totally
She's
transitioned.
a research fellow at the U of Chicago, she was.
Yeah.
Wrote an article called Things That Limit
You came in late.
I
If you
did.
want,
Yeah,
I'll
you know-
explain what I handed
Oh,
out.
you handed that out? Thank you. Sure.
Based on the income inequality of the state
Uh-huh.
and the human development of the state, which is a composite of health, education, and income.
Uh-huh.
This classifies the states. So the first thing you see is there's diversity. The United States isn't totally homogeneous.
So you've done some kind of mix of inequality and social development, and you come up with a number or something?
Yeah.
And then you've given that, assigned it to.
All right. So then how does this relate to homelessness?
Uh-huh. So you sort of done a
Here are the
regression type
types of
analysis.
states,
Uh-huh.
and here are the percentage homeless, the total homeless. So states that balance human development and income have low rates of homelessness. Utah, which was
What a surprise.
discussed,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
These two are both
has low
going to be
rates
in
of
the conference room.
homelessness.
Uh-huh.
States like
Could be, have something to do
Massachusetts.
with Mormonism.
Yeah, could,
Family
yeah.
come back in, I'm a floater.
But even though homelessness is high in states like Massachusetts.
Mhm.
In terms of
Homelessness is high. In other words, in spite of the apparent
generosity.
and lack of relatively
Typically,
less inequality, better social
Cambridge,
development, but
as well as I
more
did.
homelessness. Well, no.
And I have some friends in
Yeah,
DC
about the
who
same.
have been looking
Yeah.
at stuff, and it's mostly
In a city
mostly
like
it's
Cambridge,
how
How come there's so
people
much homelessness?
outside look
there's
at this
the
situation
high-tech area
that affects
Right.
them
here,
Right.
and then there's
enormous social forces.
other neighborhoods
Right.
So
Right.
yeah,
where
it's really really good. I've been
people
waiting
can't
to
get
start to share
jobs.
some of my
Right.
colleagues
Right.
came into one of my
Right.
friends.
so that leads to
And so
Yeah.
I know
So, thank you.
So,
What's your name?
Robert Smith.
Hi, Robert. Do you like Robert or Bob?
Bob.
Okay, Bob. We're going to put this here.
there's so many cultural differences.
So where are you gonna,
All
how are you
psychologists.
Again, everybody leaves it's community.
So this is what,
where are you gonna?
No, it depends.
Well,
now that's some data from Bob.
and it's not.
I just need to see if I can get something here, but I can do this later. I don't know, you know, it doesn't
Seem like
Doesn't matter.
they're going out there.
The Cambridge citywide approach.
Yeah.
I tend to like to focus on where I live.
Yeah, it's not Cambridge, not Belgium.
You know, I mean, Cambridge, Somerville, it's all.
They're all the same.
Part of my point about the middle finger is there can be interventions that affect the global circumstance, and then there are interventions that affect individual circumstances.
Well, the individual can do that
Depends
if you
sometimes.
solve it. But MIT is not sociological. It's understanding. There's an experimental proof. And somehow. But I can certainly see. So what? This is equal to something.
Something that I actually am very aware of, which is my perspective is that homelessness is a product of the increased by society.
Yeah, it's consistent.
But I don't want to reverse that process. Figure out how to make that.
Right, exactly, yes. Make states like Massachusetts more.
Bear in mind that no one agrees on them, and the only thing that actually makes one of Let's start by building an application. Well, I think we need to we're doing now. But what I want to do is and I know that so I've heard stories from both sides. Liberation technology.
Yeah, John, I will take, actually, do you have a computer on you by any chance?
I did not bring one, and I wanted to let you know I mentioned the one that Ned's working, or Kent Johnson's working on this need now. I can email that to you. It's actually where he found an existing framework for building these types of numbers.
Welfare and real estate.
But that's not so much data sources. That's more like a
It's a framework for.
Well, he found like the web framework where you have to build the code to get all the you might have to create like your own HTML to do it. He found someone that already had this, so all he did was borrow that template, and then now they just populate it with all the organizations. So that community group part for like homeless.
So I watched various sociologists near. I wasn't born
have
there.
that.
Interesting.
I
I
would
went to school in New
memorize
Hampshire.
that URLs like GitHub, Kent Johnson,
And I combined sociology with
They're all-
communication when I was there, and I used it to launch media out.
Well, it's the prototype.
And so now I'm looking
Oh,
for
for
the
the
other
website.
way. What if the
For the site
Salon
rather
is a
than
media
for need now.
piece of media? How can we have a
And then
network
once
where
they
people
get to
keep
the point of
each other
maybe being
which is the Christakis model.
or launch, then maybe they'll get like
Anyway,
a
Bob, so
hardware
how do you
website,
come to this? I like the fact
analysis
that we
data,
brought the chart, the information.
a list of
So-
organizations.
I'm on your list, so I
Ah.
how I got on the list.
I've Googled some searches here and there to try to see things like national statistics on homeless. To see this out there, like at a high level, they kind of like make an computation like
What did you do?
homeless by
First
by
of all,
state. I don't know if I've seen it.
research
I
techniques
maybe I
I
didn't
was
search for it
taught
to
in
like
and almost all been
what
tried.
level of granularity do
But
they
there's
get
some
down
very
to?
common sense rules done without
I also
diving
don't
deep.
know what are the protocols for doing
So
the
the problem
counting.
now is we have non-intuitive research methods, which
They
you
answer
can
census
computer instead of
report,
sitting
so
there
that's the whole
figuring
point.
out some things about the diagram
I
and
agree.
saying, I have a hunch.
They
let's
didn't have
explore
like
that.
an error bar,
Yeah.
like.
So I was taught very intuitive.
By whom?
Oh, sure. So his name was Jay Levine. He was my professor there.
To me, the other part that
And he's now a computational guy at
For the
Dartmouth,
model
and they built that, they bulked that up.
Yeah.
intervened.
Canada
More
was
person
responsible for
Right.
that.
If you have a model
He
that's
basically
kind of
said,
like,
you know,
like
your
there's
brother's
a
keeper.
code for Boston,
Sure,
a
it's a
code for
computer.
Meta Project.
Be sure you know how it works.
They're
Don't let
working
it
with
work
some
here.
level school system on getting all the data for the students. So if the students start trailing off before they hit like a point of no return, they're just trying to get a.
Well, this is why it's called. This is a self-consistent
They were like the little
set.
quiet repository for,
Right.
ooh, scary.
Once you have self-reinforcing things, it's very hard to move out of there.
Well,
But
the
the,
data that I
The
got.
point, part of the point is indeed, Sam, you started to talk about this, there's really different,
And they.
first of all, there are different subsets in the community. There are people that are kind of
District level.
they may be employed or partially employed, they may be, something, and they just don't have enough to.
One
You know,
curfew
such a store was
to engage in something, when somebody has
Boston. Right around the corner.
Code for Boston.
And I used to live,
Meets
I
in the
lived in
Cambridge
Alpharetta.
Innovation Center every Tuesday. Every single
Parker
Tuesday.
here, but I used to live in there.
Their project around this was mentioned.
And I always wondered, why was it that Central Square always had more?
Not mine.
And then I
You
was like,
would
oh,
enrich
then there's
your
like,
world.
well, part of it was like, I wanna say it's a halfway house for
Your understanding.
Where is this Cambridge?
drug abuse or
It's
something
right
like that. And that's kind of where we're on a day.
That's where there's a reason
Near
for
Main
people
Street
to be there.
and,
in that area.
It's
there's
near the
other
Marriott
ones around
Hotel.
too.
If
There's
you
one
go out
Yes,
the Marriott,
Yeah.
for like
and you
crimes,
go
on Albany Street that there's
Yeah.
that
you
shelter.
go over
That sometimes at the
Broadway
end of the day,
maybe,
like,
but it's called Cambridge Innovation Center, CIC, just
Yeah,
online.
And certainly, one of the answers to your question is
Code for Boston. They do work with the mayor. They do work with some.
work where you can find work.
You would enrich
And if you
your
can't get a
own
regular
with your
job,
understanding of
busking and panhandling
in
is
a way
what you
that
want. You want to be in a place with lots of people.
Sometimes
So
it gets into kind of
there's a pure employment angle.
This is
which
That's right.
make sure that
I'm not
that's
saying you
still
won't
an
find
available
a
Still
job.
a resource,
There's
there's something
but
that's a
there's sort of a
resource for
ballast
people that
that's
brings
served
people to
by
a
having
particular
some people who've seen
and understanding what that resource
Code
is,
for Boston.
Code for Boston. Yes, sir.
whether it's
And cheap transportation.
right.
When getting an intercity bus is expensive and you have a limited number of close friends, family members, you don't want to be too far.
Yeah. So I think that there's the point is that there are these macro variables like the price of housing, and, minimum wage and things like that that are kind of really important to these discussions. And then there's the high complexity side, which is, what are the individual circumstances that a particular person has that have left them without, some family support structure or on drugs or whatever it is, disabled, and what kind of help do they specifically need? So
Yeah.
there's
I'd love to add one more layer, which is keep it simple, stupid. There's some things that will make a huge difference in someone's life and only they know it. And if we ask them, they will often tell. I was at a suicide prevention meeting last night. I'm going to ask Robbie to get in touch with you guys. There's so much overlap. And he's done work for 9 years.
Well, it's all the same, right? The other way to say it is that these are the people that are outside of society. Right?
Yes. They're outside the box.
That's right.
And that's why they're invisible. We don't even know how to talk about them.
You can get a lot of that data down to the congressional district level from the Human Development Project.
From the Human Development Project?
Yeah, American Human Development Project online.
I was urging you guys to make more of a formal connection with a group that came up, the Code for Boston group. They do work on this. I've been in those.
Yeah, I've been to their meetings, but
they get a little wonky, and sometimes they don't ask the actual people with
the
front
problem
line.
is that they're at this point they're task oriented.
They are
doing a particular code development project, and there's not much to talk at that point. I mean, there's once they've finished with it or something, or if they're planning it, it's a different story.
But that's exactly to my point. Is they're doing that because nobody's saying, wait, let's do a root level thing before you start. They're wait.
But that's not their competence. Their competence.
Another thing too is that they're so kind of just looking at them from a different group.
Yeah.
They have, to me, Code for America started as this is the model I use. It's not the right way to look at it. It's being taped, but to be careful. But that the government has a certain amount of resources, and when they are resource limited, Code for America partners with the government.
That's right.
So some of the projects come out are the government needs help here, and it becomes a government which may only be part of the picture. And
Sure.
they are
And
projects that
it's
are
limited
attached.
by the imagination of the people who set them up. But the point is that this is one of those things where trying something and seeing what works may actually be helpful. So
Yes.
I'm not saying
I'm not saying this is wrong, but what I'm saying is this: there are some individuals who would be receptive if they were told, I keep saying Switzerland. I've been in the meetings where somebody from Cambridge City Government said something to them.
The problem is that we're not doing an analysis of homelessness here. We're providing an opportunity for people to engage in the discussion.
And what I'm saying is they are too, but it's creating some signal and some noise. And so they can continue to do what they're doing. I think they would love to hear from an alternative method, they see
Right,
one
but
path.
you have to understand that for us to do an analysis of these issues and come up with a recommendation for solution, it's a major research project.
Yes, I'm not
That's
denying
all we're
any of
doing
that.
at this point.
I'm not denying any of that. I'm
What
saying
are
like,
we doing?
wait, they're like
We're
two.
just
Thinking about it?
That's right. We're sort of we are talking about it in this context in the understanding that there are really two different approaches. One is that we can do a scientific analysis and frame the solution. The other one is that we can use the distributed understanding and decision-making mechanisms as a way to make progress. And we are here using the latter and not the former.
I think that there's more in common than meets the eye. The language may be different. And my hope is that because we're talking about stuff that has enormous consequences on individuals, that there's some sort of ambassadorship thing going on, because you may both hit a breakthrough that the other one needs.
Absolutely, but
okay, good.
The only problem, they're structured very differently, those two different kinds.
They are, and I think that structure is what I love to identify. It's like, could we work on this a little bit together?
Right. I mean, if we have a bunch of people that want to do data analysis, as you're talking about,
Sure.
Then we can start engaging in a scientific project.
Well, they're already going to be changing the dialogue because of what they're putting out. It's going to go straight to the heads of politicians and policymakers and all that. So I'm just trying to make sure the voices are heard, you know, that the voices are identified before it's D-Day with the report. I'm just a gadfly, you know. I'm a free agent. I just go around and go, please.
So I would find it more helpful if instead of saying please, you said here's a specific problem that's not being solved well here. Maybe it's being solved well somewhere else.
Okay.
And
there you go.
So, and I think of all of this as identifying points of power, levers, sources of energy. And I see actually I see a surprising amount of energy. Like when I started seriously looking at this a couple weeks ago, I thought that people were sort of,
no, there's a lot of work.
We're doing something similar to what they've done in previous decades, and it's not. And that's really nice. Yeah. In fact, the government seems to be ahead of most of the local community groups who have a hard time.
Which government?
The U.S. government, both, particularly the federal government, but also some state governments.
Work on homelessness?
Their analysis of homelessness and their understanding of where there are potential levers for change seems to be much more intelligent and nuanced than the perspectives of charities.
You would believe.
That's right.
Right.
Based on what they written.
What is their where did you find this?
So the U.S. has this interagency working group that tried to identify all the people who are spending money on homelessness. They simplified the parts of the budget that were funding homelessness in a bunch of places. And so now every year they can tell you we put exactly $5.5 billion into homelessness in this budget year. And that's been cleaned up basically in the last during this administration.
Okay.
So it started under Bush. So starting in like 2002.
Okay. So let's say that they've now refined their funding mechanism.
Right.
But now you said that you said that they have an understanding of how to change it.
Their appreciation for the different approaches that people have done across the country seems very good.
What is it?
They published they're now Kool-Aid drinkers about just providing housing. Like there are lots of other interesting problems, but just providing housing, not only is it innumerable, it also seems to be more effective than most of the other things people have done. They're convinced based on where like 5% of their funding has gone. And they've been asking for the last 3 years, actually starting in 2010, they officially asked all the states, please start spending your money this way. The states don't have to do it. The states still get all these earmarks. The individual earmark programs have a particular name, and one of them is funding meals, and so it's only going to be for meals.
So this housing first. How do they do the housing? That's I sort of asked that question, and
yeah,
it wasn't answered because I see that as being not a trivial statement.
First,
who do they provide the housing for?
They triage. Yeah, they triage. They provide it to people who are chronically underhoused, and most of the places that have done a serious case study started with the people who had the hardest time, had the poorest housing retention rate prior to the program. So look for people who had very low retention rates, had a mix of all kinds of problems that seemed like it would make them unfit for housing, and they wanted to see if it would work for them. And they still get 70–80% retention rates on those populations. And then some of the groups some of the projects have expanded. The one based in New York has expanded pretty well. Some of them have not. They basically stayed with one building.
Is there someone who keeps kind of like the overall count of the homelessness? Because you imagine you have folks who
every year
transition and the folks that become homeless, so you've got this incoming.
There's an American Homelessness Report. It's based on census data. The individual census count is done differently from the regular census. Most cities do a one-night count as well as a sort of an analysis that uses their census data. The one-night count gives you a peak number, but a lot of those people are transient.
How frequently is it done?
Every year, once a year.
Sam, are you posting all this stuff or links to all this stuff that you found? Sounds like a treasure trove of little nuggets.
Yeah.
By the way, this mirrors what happened with security and spending at the federal level. They realized that the government would say things, the states would respond, push back on the government, would push back on the states. And so what ended up happening was the state said, no, we're not going to issue passports. You're going to issue passports. Because the states, the federal government said, we want driver's licenses to be it. And the state said, So this ping pong effect, which was like 8 years ago, I think they're finally realizing they have to stop ping ponging because it just destabilizes the system over and over.
Or for this, in terms of the law, this is government, federal, state, being down. Who's got the biggest chunk of the responsibility and the biggest chunk of money? Is it all coming from the federal funding, or is it the states at each?
I don't know.
I'd be curious to see like just what is the
one thing
breakdown by each.
All I've seen is the following hint, which is there are 3 paragraphs in the official, the federal administration's report on what we should do at homelessness that dedicates maybe a page to talking about how there is currently no way to align funding from federal, state, local, and other sources. And it's very hard for people to get the capital to build a new building if they're trying to reallocate from all those places. So I think the data is not very well aligned.
But there wouldn't be like line items in the budget for these?
Only since 2003 have there been line items in the federal budget that clarify money that's going to homelessness.
At the state level?
And I don't think individual states
Oh, so then that becomes kind
haven't
of,
seen it at the state level.
you can't really find out. That
You
Or
can probably
you
figure
can
out what the
find out,
biggest
yeah.
spenders are. So you can go to the agencies that are getting most of the money and you could ask them. I think that might be an interesting approach. That's the kind of thing Code for America did when they were helping with data.gov. But it's a slightly painful process.
And there are a lot of typos in the
Yeah, you have to do data cleaning. You have to do all kinds of.
No. I mean, in the laws that are passed, there are typos and little weird intentional glitches. Oh, we can talk another time.
You made this comment about Housing First being successful, but the first thing that I find here is a write-up that says Housing First doesn't work.
By the way, I didn't say it was successful. I don't have an opinion yet, but the federal government is absolutely on board. They promote Housing First on the first page and all.
That's already I don't particularly trust the decision-making processes of the federal government.
Yay!
I think I can document fairly.
Can I quote you in the Globe?
You can quote me on that one. I've already
The
got on
algorithm-
record that centralized decision-making doesn't work.
The algorithm of the federal government may have a defect in it. Stay tuned. Love it. Sam, one other question, earmarks.
What about
There have been people who've talked about return to very specific earmarks for organizations that are effective. Instead of the dance for funding they go through and all the research that's a waste. Have you seen anything about that? Come across anything where it's like, let's vote as taxpayers to earmark money for that church that's doing it well?
I don't know how to think about those things. That seems like it would be very hard to do right.
Well, it's turning back the clock earlier. I was just wondering if you came across it. Okay, no problem.
So one of the
Thank you.
One of the goals we have for the group is to map the ecosystem of Boston.
Yeah.
Across all different problems, top areas. And some are really easy, like for climate change, you find quickly a lot of the organizations that do climate change. But we've gotten to EdTech, we've gotten to climate change. But for what you're talking about, like, we have so many organizations I know the need now is that guy, I find that kind of said, you know, he's put together a list of all the demand side of the needs now.
Demand side of
For homeless, for like food, clothing, and shelter.
Is it any individual level?
Organization level.
We had a ring binder that was put together by a guy back about 40 years ago. And there's a sheet that's posted in almost every lunch for the homeless and many other places that lists resources. But it's very limited compared to what we had 35 years ago.
Is this Backy? Was that his work? No, somebody else. Okay. To your point, maybe as I exit, we could look at this as an environmental issue. If we look at it as an environmental issue with resources, there are people in the environment, Boston Harbor cleanup, who did amazing things to get something done. I'm not sure it translates, but it might create confidence in the approach.
So here's the problem.
Sure.
We have to figure out, one of the statements is, there's a difference between big problems and complex problems.
Okay.
If the problem of homelessness is a complex problem, then Boston Harbor cleanup type approaches are not going to work. We have to figure out.
I'm talking about the indigenous, all the cultures that were involved in that.
I understand.
Oh, okay. All right.
Here, the issue is the following.
All right.
There are two parts of this that I can understand. One is there are socioeconomic forces that we need to understand that can have an impact on homelessness.
Right.
And the other one is there's the individual level problems that need to be addressed. Okay. Those two things are very difficult to disentangle using traditional mindsets.
Sure.
Either one of them.
Yes, yes.
But both of them need, so they need also different structures in order to solve it.
Yes.
The former you need to solve by doing an analysis.
Okay.
The latter you need to solve by having an organization that can touch each individual.
Yes.
And is capable to respond to the needs of each individual.
Yes.
What?
An organization that can touch each individual, or just enough individuals.
Or a network of organizations.
It has to be an organization. Why does it have to be an organization? Because the individual requires ultimately resources, assistance, all kinds of things that may have to be drawn from many different places.
It's a coordination caseworker issue.
Well, that's what organization is about.
You said the former and the latter. Which is the latter?
The latter is the individual needs. The individual needs cannot be addressed by socioeconomic forces.
That's right.
Okay. And we are back to the way I think about the individual needs piece is that there have always been individuals, maybe more today, but there always have been individuals that don't manage in the context of the society. Always.
Sure.
And how did we deal with it? Either we left them out on the mountain or whatever it was, or we took care of them because we had family members that took care of them, or permanent institutions, or, but the point is that some of those are successful because they address the part of the need that the individual has and continues to enable them to be part of society. And some of them simply warehouse them or whatever it is until they're no longer around.
I interrupted you. You were going to continue with your description of how the former and the latter differ and how focusing on homelessness implies a structure for the analysis.
The two pieces are the following. If I understand that the key issue is people have an opportunity to gain income, if that income is from begging or from jobs, but housing is not available in the places that they want to have the job at a rate at which they can afford it given the jobs that they have it, then I have an understanding of a macro level. at least local level intervention that I can understand. And maybe then the solution is micro housing, right? I mean, people talk about micro housing. Or maybe then the solution is, you know, something. But one has to understand that on a geographical basis, on a so on and so on basis, but I can do a scientific analysis. Okay. I can map economic opportunity, I can map housing costs, I can map wages, and I can figure out what the issues are, and I can do that analysis. It'll cost to do that analysis. It might cost a couple $100,000, or it might cost, you know, whatever. Or if we get volunteers to do it, it might cost, you know, effectively $50,000 or something like that. You know, there is still some cost. Then I can do that analysis, and I can come up with the answer. And I can go to the city of Boston and I say, if you, you know, create a housing on a
All right. Thank you.
If you create, you know, 200 housing units underneath the Boston City Hall, we will solve the problem. You know, whatever it is. What?
We need 4,000 units.
4,000. That's right. Well, they have a big Boston City Hall plaza. You know, you could, you know, I mean, it's playground. That would be something to do. That's right. But the point is that I can do a quantitative analysis of that. And by policy decisions, I can solve the problem at the macro level. But I can't do the same thing to solve the individual problems that people have. Whether they need, you know, someone to take care of them, to cook for them, to sew their clothing, to give them haircuts, to make them feel like they have meaning in life, to you know, 9,000 possible things to give them a drug treatment or whatever.
I've seen a great solution to that, a great proposed solution to that, which is to give all the aid workers, like everyone who interacts with people who are homeless, to give them a single channel where they can send people. This touches on your organization meme, which is staffed by a network of a few thousand of the volunteers who work in the space who handle the hundreds of different issues that arise and know about it directly.
Right, but the single channel, this is the problem, that it's like a healthcare system, right? It has to have specialists to deal with these kinds of issues.
Yes.
It may have to have teams that deal with those kinds of issues.
But those people all exist now.
Yes and no. We don't, I mean, you're a little bit cavalier because we don't know how to deal with mental health problems, really.
And the budgets and the staff and the caseload.
That's right.
May be such that
So
it might be hard for them to.
I understand and agree. The proposal was to have a completely volunteer-run group by the people who in every one of these areas has a volunteer-run group that helps to support the people who have fallen through the cracks in their community in that area, even if we don't know how to solve it.
These are not things that you can assume that someone knows how to do.
Right.
You cannot just say, you know, you volunteer to do this. This is not like, you know, cooking lunch, which even cooking lunch, you have to have someone who knows how to wash their hands. Which
volunteers hand the lunches to the people.
That's right.
They can handle the food bank, the Park Street Church giving out food,
but they can't handle diagnosis of depression and.
This is how we handle suicide hotlines.
I don't agree that that's a functional approach. Okay.
You don't have to like the solution. I'm saying I've seen a solution that I like that I think addresses that problem. No, you're right, it's a separate problem.
I'm giving you my response to it. I don't think that all of these tasks can be handled by people who think they know what to do under these circumstances.
No,
I think that some of them.
The routing. Separate the routing from who is solving the problem.
Well, but that's the point. But you can't separate the routing from who's solving the problem.
Well, one of the things that comes up in the discussions in the coffee class on Sundays and in the discussion of the MANA leadership. MANA is the name of this lunch, and its associated ministers, is that.
But by the way, let me just finish this comment for a moment. I don't even believe that the experts that claim that they know how to solve these problems know how to solve all these problems. So let's go back.
That's certainly
true. These are refugees. So that term came because of the bridge closing to Long Island shelter. And so the idea is you take a page out of the book of the Community Services Organization, which along with other groups, services to welfare people. They were working from the 50s through to the 70s. My brother Charles was involved in Manhattan multi-service centers. So a woman who had a child or two children could go to a multi-service center and she could deal with Head Start. She could deal with aid for food for aid to dependent children, housing, different types of housing, supplemental income under crisis, all of those things. She wouldn't have to go all around the city.
Right.
So the thought that had come up, and I don't know how seriously it was taken, but we stayed on the topic for a period of time, is to have one place where people could go, they could, any time of day, they could take a crap. For 2 or 3 meals a day, they could eat. They could get water, they could store their kit, and at night they could have a place to sleep, all in one physical location. This would free up some of their daytime hours
From going from place to place to place to place.
which they could then use for going to training, going to jobs, even if the job was half a day, 2 days a week, a beginning. So that was one of the things that came out. Nobody followed up on it. The people who run MANA are kind of occupied.
And part of the problem, and correct me if I'm wrong, but again, I'm starting to understand that geography is playing a major role in this issue. Right? The point is that the homeless have to be located in basically the most expensive real estate.
That's why they put the Pine Street Inn a long way from downtown, to get them out of downtown.
But it doesn't work because they have to be there in order to beg or whatever, however they get their food. The most likely place that they're going to be able to do that is in places where there's high rent district,
Right.
not low rent district. So if they're being attracted downtown to the opportunity where, because that's where you have high density food places, and that's where you have high density benches, and that's where you have high density whatever it is, wherever you're going to be.
And it's like, what's his name, who was a bank robber? Why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why do you go downtown? Because that's where the food is.
That's right.
That's
so the point is that if the homeless had a natural propensity to be outside the city nobody would talk about them.
Right.
Right? And if the homeless had a propensity to be in small towns, they would occupy abandoned buildings that are, that happen in small towns.
Right.
So instead, if you understand it geographically that they're attracted to the centralized location,
there's a lot of people
then
walking
the
around
only
the street
place,
who have a lot of money.
then the only place that it makes sense to set up a facility that will help them is right in the middle of the most expensive real estate.
Isn't that
Makes
just,
sense.
don't you love it?
That's right.
Try getting it.
There's a
Thanks.
the urban, is it called urban flight, where people were in the city, they all went out.
Went out, now they're going
back.
back. Yeah. Everyone's going back into the city.
And you got kind of a juxtaposition of them as well as the areas that have been kind of income compressed, kind of adjacent. So you've got both that's several cities in America that seem like that.
I think this is actually similar to the Walmart problem, right? It used to be if you were trying to build a warehouse, people would complain that the warehouse has to be in expensive real estate and it's being used for other things because you want it to be central to make sure you can get to people. And then they started building large enough box warehouses that it didn't matter. You would just set it up somewhere where you could find power, roads, and other things. And some cities take that approach. They find a place that's not in the city center, but they build all of these things into it. That's one of the things that Salt Lake did. Was they built, it was all new construction where they decided they would have 1,000 people. It was all new construction. They had all these services, and you could get everything, including employment there. But that took extra work. They had to line people up who said, we will hire people out of there. Some places like Seattle started doing this. Seattle had one of the first wet permanent houses in the country for alcoholics. It used to be you had to promise you'd go dry before you could get a house. And if you fall off the wagon, you lose the house, you lose your apartment. And Seattle was one of the cities that said that seems like maybe we're doing it backwards. And they built that was sort of the most expensive real estate in Seattle. Satisfying all these things, right downtown, facing a transit station. And it's been super controversial, but there are a lot of interesting case studies about how it's worked.
Well, I'm here in the group that I had someone who was mad, got very first bad because we weren't talking, we had a lot of different people talk about different issues. And he was not happy that people weren't talking about the issues of his area. And one of the issues affecting them is gentrification. In terms of now they're going to come in and supplant people who.
That's right.
And
now the people who used to live there want to be in the same neighborhood and can afford the housing. That's the issue.
Yeah, the word that, yeah. There's talk about Chinatown.
Yeah, a lot of areas of Boston are gentrified.
That's still, yeah. So I can understand his pain. He's like, hey, you guys gotta help. That's one, the thing that's interesting about the group is there's a couple hundred people, they all have different interests. And I'm trying to facilitate all of them. And some of them are more popular, like climate change and education out here.
This is the group on data.
Like data science or social good. Then there's folks who are like, I want to help the elephants down. And there's a few people. Homeless housing's got about, I did 20, 30 people. But gentrification is just a few people.
How many people are you part of your meeting?
So far, the first one was about 65. The last couple were about 20, 30.
So a lot of people.
Still a lot of people.
That's one.
And, we're still learning. And still trying to figure out how to.
The problem is that data projects, I supervise data projects. I work with people who supervise data projects. It's very hard to do them on an occasional basis. The question is, how does one create a structure that enables a project to be brought to completion?
And so that's kind of what we're struggling with. What we're doing initially is let's piggyback off of already completed projects. Like the University of Chicago has done something for data science for social good the last 3 years. They have all these projects they've done on all different topics. They have one for homeless that I know is out there. They had one for lead poisoning. And we thought, well, they did the study Chicago with lead poisoning. I didn't realize it caused a correlation between lead poisoning and development was for kids that are young. I'm like, wow, that's kind of, I can understand. And we're like, well, let's do the same study in Boston. And then we're like, wow, that's going to be hard to get the data and all these things. But that's kind of what our first thing was. Let's not reinvent the wheel. And so we have a list. That's what we're trying to work off is to do that. We were still, like I work with guys from Corporate America. They've got ties to the government. They have an opiate data set on that problem. So that might be something we do original research on. But right now, it's just more just like, hey, there's people who study, people who many cities have done work on bike safety. So rather than start from scratch, let's take all the bike safety stuff, look at it, and then go, can we have that be a front end to then just have us modify and adapt, which is less resources. So that's how I'm trying to get around it first, is not to just be more transfer of information rather than original research. Because I agree with you. And we're not set up as a data group to do this. Like Chicago's has the fellowship program. They do 3 months where people get like funding to go out to Chicago for 3 months and do.
Even 3 months. You know, I mean, I do a lot of research. I mean, but I can talk with you about strategies.
Yeah, I'd love to see more collaboration and knowledge sharing.
I've got a bizarre idea. And it may
Bizarre
have,
is good.
I'm sure that it's been thought of many times before. And you may even have found it. a lot of the homeless people actually know about the importance of cell phones in their life. And they have a lot of homeless people are partly homeless, which is the folks that used to be their home, they can tolerate them, but not on a regular basis. So the cell phone helps to maintain part of that connection. Now, every cell phone, modern cell phone, has GPS. So here's the bizarre idea. It would be a bad sample. Maybe you couldn't prove anything with the sample. But the idea is to arrange some kind of social contract with an agency that's helping homeless people. And the homeless people agree for part of their day, they won't put their cell phone in the middle box.
So we can track their GPS.
What?
So we can track their location.
So we can see where they're going and where they but the homeless don't want you to know where they're sleeping.
Is that the case?
What?
Is that the case, that they don't want you to know where they're sleeping?
Well, there are cities that are imposing criminalization of homelessness. So Massachusetts is not very close to doing that.
Well, so one possibility, so you may be right that that's the right way to do things. The other possibility is just to, because they trust us, and they don't trust us, that we will simply use all the information only for analysis of the problem and not for anything having to do with individuals.
The organization that touches the homeless at lunch programs or their other regular needs, like house.
Yeah, we're running late actually. Why
Yeah,
don't you
because
call
my
everybody
car
in?
is, I have to change my car, okay? But I would like to continue to have another.
Well, do we have your email address?
No.
Why don't you give it to Stan?
It's Selma?
That would be the person who would go individually with each person.
I would like to stay, but my car is in the middle.
Another level of trust, which is between the researcher, an agency like yours, or a company like yours, and the person who has the good faith and trust of the homeowner.
There's a big opportunity. It could be very useful considering what's going on. And if we could get people to do the analysis again, we have to.
Yeah,
whoever would touch the data would have to sign, would have to study how the protocol.
Absolutely. You want to make it difficult for people to hack into that data set.
Yeah, both to hack into it and also the treatment of the data by the people who learn about
what it's used for.
This is a new email.
But in principle, that could be very interesting.
All right, I'll start talking with individuals that I like.
And you find out what people are comfortable with.
Do you want to reposition that? So there are actually some people at the other end.
Google GPS and homeless. The first thing that comes up is a study that the Danish city GPS and homeless. Google GPS homeless. You'll see that there's just as of last year, one Danish city turns GPS to tracking to help the homeless. So that might be a good place to like.
I'm sorry, what would my search string be? GPS homeless?
And then it's based on homeless, just those two words.
Yeah. But doing it here in Boston would be a good idea. Okay.
Do we want to do a quick
Sam, we should
wrap
do a
up?
Wrap up, yeah. Let's do that.
Great. And then Nir, did you want to say a few words?
Why don't you
mentioned it earlier, but
yeah, why don't you do a general wrap up and then I'll just close up.
Okay, excellent.
You want to do readout from the groups? Is that
Yeah, can we let's do a quick a couple minutes from each group talking about what your conversation was about. And I will remind everyone that we have a hack pad where we're tracking notes.
And the city approach.
Excellent.
And I'll upload the notes. We covered a lot of material, so I'll be brief on this. I mean, we were just talking about the various like affordable housing, sort of the process people go through with that, and the various local
efforts in reconstruction going on in public housing in Cambridge. We talked a little bit about the Cambridge Multi-Service Center, which is sort of the one-stop place that contains a lot of the different agencies and services where people go and find out what benefits they may be eligible for and sort of what the process is there. And talked about Cambridge City Council and some of the personalities and concerns of members of City Council and how that plays into the efforts of
diversity
spending.
of thinking about the nature of the problem.
Right. Yeah. So the ideologies and.
Is it a problem
push and pull.
of people who are homeless, or is it a problem for the people who have to deal with the people who are homeless? This is the simplest way.
Yeah. And then we started talking about sort of the response in terms of police and emergency personnel and alcohol and drug treatment organizations, Justice Start, transitional housing organizations like Justice Start, Homeowners Rehab, CASPAR, CASPAR, okay. And just and also started talking about how all these sort of things, how they knit together, what the communication is between them, and how it's a long process to get them all together on the same page. And the rest I'll put in notes.
And I just add, if I may, that the one part of the wait lists of the Cambridge Housing Authority that have been frozen because of this massive renovation stuff that they're doing, the one wait list that remains open is the SRO wait list. So there are still opportunities.
What's
for
SRO?
Single room occupancy. And so that is one little.
How long is the list?
The SRO list, I'm not sure, but the overall list is quite long. It's.
Are we talking about hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands?
Don't know specifically about the SRO list. The general list is 10,000, but the people with Cambridge resident preference for the general body of lists are about 3,000. The SRO wait list, I'm not sure. It's probably hundreds.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We, myself and David, talked about abuse and how that can play into homelessness. One of the things that was a connection for me that I didn't make when we were talking about it up here on the board was that there's not only sort of these traditional kinds of abuse, sort of domestic abuse situations, but also online abuse that can contribute to people's feelings of social isolation and sort of retreating and sort of loss of dignity and all these things. So we discussed that. We also talked about, this is not necessarily only related to abuse, but when there's agencies whose task it is to help in these situations, they're often extremely, say, bureaucratic and sort of have very low adaptability to different kinds of situations, different details changing of people's circumstances, listening to people's personal needs at the individual level versus trying to sort of shove them into a box and sort of carry out the ABC plan. And so maybe a need to restructure how those organizations are set up overall, decentralize, maybe have some different approaches and let things evolve and play out and see what kinds of things work instead of coming in with sort of top-down plans. Those are sort of my two big notes.
Anne has some pretty good ideas. Anne, do you want to say something?
No.
We had a good mashup and collaboration of ideas. We came back to the subject of dignity a lot, actually, when talking about this and destruction of dignity. And we also talked a lot about good faith and how good faith can be important for extricating people from bad barrels. It requires good faith on the part of the person being extricated. When we talked about the savior syndrome, as it was called earlier, and how that can affect a good faith in one channel or another for the sender of their experience. someone mentioned it. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for us.
Sam, want to wrap up and then I will say just a couple words or?
Great. So we took our notes on the Blackboard. I'll also put them online. There are a few of them on the Hackpad already. And we talked largely about two things. One was, what are the kinds of information that would be helpful at a macro level for figuring out where there's a problem and what the problem looks like, and how someone might more seriously attack that and model it. And we didn't agree on a particular set of issues, but we just talked about some of the macro level things like local cost of living and minimum wage, but also access to services that matter to a population, and like ease of transportation, and the clustering of both services and cost of real estate. And then we talked about where it's useful to have a map of how things are going, of how housing is developing, or how homelessness on the streets is changing over time. And we compared it a bit to some of the ecosystem maps that have been done to help a community both directly change water quality, but also push all their organizations to change water quality. So we talked about some potential types of data that would help people clean up their neighborhoods and make it feel very local to them, even if they don't interact with this on a daily basis, to see how it affects the community around them. And then we talked a little bit about where there were avenues for change, how we could describe places where data could make a difference, or where connecting the groups of people who are currently analyzing things could help them be more effective. We know that a lot of the Code for America type groups are usually solving an existing problem that some organization has, and that may or may not be tied to improving life for the community. It's usually tied to fixing things for an organization. John, was there anything you'd add?
I think you covered the macro. Mention of macro versus individual level. That the analysis can only go so far, and that can help maybe shape some policy. But then you also need to have that complement with all the organizations that people have talked about in terms of getting to the people on the other side of the phone.
Yeah, you made some great points about how we don't actually know how to solve the problems that many individuals have, and we have to figure out better ways.
Right. So I can add a few words. I don't know, we kind of at wrap up point.
We are wrapped up.
Yeah. Good. Okay,
Well,
so
I would at some point like to add, I did find the details about this Cambridge initiative and the flyer for the two meetings that I mentioned from a couple weeks ago. And if everyone's welcome to look at this, or I could, I guess, email a link around. How can we as a community better help and house people who are homeless in Cambridge? Lend your voice, bring your experiences, thoughts. Wednesday, Thursday, and the consultant that they've hired to work on this is the CSH, the Source for Housing Solutions. I can tell you what the CSH stands for, and the contact person is, and she doesn't spell her name out, but I think it's, I can get it by going back of one link. It's Chevalier with the Department of Human Services Programs Planning and Development Division. But her name is Shelley, Shelley, Chevalier, Chevalier. There's a phone number, 349-6206.
We can mail this around.
Yeah, and the key sentence in the announcement on the city calendar website is, these community meetings are part of a planning process that will inform the development of a capitalized strategic action plan on homelessness in Cambridge. And that's meant to get underway in earnest in the fall. Anyway, excuse me.
No, thank you.
So first of all, I want to just thank everyone for coming. I was away for a couple of meetings, so this is very pleased that everyone is here. I clearly the homelessness and problem of people who are in circumstances of homelessness is a really significant problem in society. I do think it's linked to many other of the aspects of problems that the society is facing. And, I mentioned this when we were talking about it, but it is definitely linked to the increasing complexity of society and to lots of other problems that we've analyzed in the context of addressing social society problems. I do think that there are two different aspects of the problem that were mentioned. One is understanding sort of the economic and social forces that are at work and how we can intervene in them in order to affect the circumstances, whether it's minimum wage or whether it's cost of housing or whether it's general services at that level, on the one hand. And on the other hand, the problem of how do we address the needs of individuals and either provide them with support or link them to communities that are providing them with support or relink them to family and all kinds of questions about how that's done, addressing all of the many issues that were talked about there to bring, to shift their conditions out of a self-consistent circumstance which is problematic for them and for others to circumstances much better. In order to address the latter, a very different structure of organization has to be developed. And the efforts to change the social services organizations I think will not go far enough on a short-term basis. I think whatever the steps that are being taken are important and hopefully progress. But there's really need for understanding how organizations that address individual needs can work effectively. And I don't think that we are there yet. I think that we need to have more conversations about it. In 2 weeks, I think we'll have another session where the ideas from today will hopefully feed into additional thinking about what actions can be taken to make an impact. And I hope we'll come into that discussion. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And there were a lot of great suggestions of people who we might bring into the conversation. We will send around, if you're not on the email list, let me know, give us your email. And we have a little section of people to invite on the notes already. Just make sure that the people you mentioned are on there.
Yeah, if you were not going to add them electronically, hand them to Sam.
That's right. You can also leave names here.
So, would you like to invite this one?
Yeah, please. Why don't you make a list with more people to be invited? You have a few other key people in this meeting, or maybe you'll just announce the meeting.
Thanks, everyone, for joining in online. See you in 2 weeks.